Red Hat for grouping users. But sometimes you want to create general purpose groups such as sales. So our task will be to create a sales group and add Linux CBT and Student 1 as members. Because through group memberships we can assign permissions to different folders or directories and or files throughout the file system. So to implement this task, we'll use group add, followed by the name of the group, sales. This creates the group and assigns a group ID into etc group. Let's go ahead and give this a try. We'll echo the exit status, and then we'll cat the contents of etc group, where you see that we now have a new group, sales, with GID 502. Now we need to add members to this group. Now, just a brief note about the X that you see here in the group file. Groups support passwords, but most applications don't make use of this feature. So it's there to support perhaps legacy applications or applications that intend to make use of group passwords. So that's why you see an X between the group name and the group ID. It means that it references the GShadow file, and that's this file here, which currently does nothing, meaning none of the passwords are defined, indicated by the exclamation mark. So we now have this new group file. How do we add members? Very easy. You can either do group mod or user mod. User mod will allow you to modify one user or one user's membership. Group mod will allow you to modify various users. And if you man group mod, for example, you'll get more information about its usage. But group mod modifies to reflect the changes. It tells you. You can change the name, change the group ID of the item. It allows you to update the group. User mod allows you to influence the user's membership to the group. So use group mod to modify properties of a group. Use user mod to modify membership to the group. So we've added a group. Step 2. User mod, upper G, because it's a supplemental group, unless you want sales to become a primary group. Sales is the name of the group, followed by the UID. Linux CBT as an example. We'll make Linux CBT a supplemental member of the group. Let's echo the exit status, and we missed it there. Let's cat now the group file, and you'll see sales now has one member, Linux CBT. Now let's add the second member. And this will be for Student 1, allowing Student 1 to also take membership in this supplemental group. We'll now echo the exit status and then cat the group file again. Now we see delimited by a comma, two users, Linux CBT and Student 1, who are members of sales, which means wherever we apply permissions for GID 502 or the sales group, the users Linux CBT and Student 1 will inherit those permissions. So use user mod to make those changes regarding group memberships. Now just note, two types of groups exist. Primary, supplemental. Primary is used by default for users' permissions, especially when creating files and or directories. Supplemental, used to determine effective permissions. And any user can belong to n number of supplemental groups, but only one primary group. And for any user, if you type the ID command, you'll see this information. Let's just note another useful command, use ID to determine the group information of user. So here we've used ID for the root user. We see that the user's UID, GID are set to 0. The groups include what you see here. Now let's try for the Linux CBT user. This user's ID is 500, 500. Groups is set to 500 for Linux CBT. Now you may be wondering, why don't we see the new group information? Because that information is determined when the user creates a new shell. This whole session has to be reinitialized in order for the new group to show up. However, that's not a big deal to implement. So the effect of permissions inherited as a result of modifying a group such as the sales group will not be realized until you create a new session. For example, SSHing into the system would do the trick. So in a separate shell, let's go ahead and SSH to localhost. This prompts us to accept the key for the user XCBT, and it will authenticate. Now that we're in, let's execute ID, and now you see with a new bash shell, we belong to the supplemental groups as follows. 502 for sales. So now in this shell, we can inherit permissions related to sales, wherever they're applied throughout our file system. We'll exit the session so that we can continue our studies since it's not as important. So let's just note that. Create a new shell session to realize new group membership information. Otherwise, it isn't read by default while the session's running, but prior to the creation of the session. So let's recap the utilities that are available. To create a user, use UserAdd, followed by the user's ID and optionally, or the user's name optionally, some settings like shell as well as home directory. Set a password using the password command. We know the meaning of the different fields in etc shadow that correspond to the different users. To add a group, use Group-Add. To list groups, use Groups. To modify a user's group membership, supplemental or primary, use UserMod and either upper G or lower G to modify the primary group membership. So we've got UserAdd, Group-Add, UserMod, GroupMod. Those are your user and group management utilities. You've also got UserDel and GroupDel. So UserDel as well as GroupDel are used to delete users and groups respectively. Now with that said, what about the GUI? We can briefly or quickly go through the GUI. Since you know how the shell works, the GUI is very easy to follow. Launch an instance of systemconfig-users, and this brings up the GUI enable tool, which takes care of both users and groups. By default, the interface displays non-system, which means non-backgrounded accounts, as well as the non-root accounts. In other words, accounts beginning with the user ID 500, such as Linux, CBT, and Student 1. Useful information including the primary group, as well as, and you can sort by if you'd like these columns, as well as full name, which is the description field, login shell, and home directory are returned. You can alter this output by navigating to the main menu and changing the settings of the environment so that you don't hide system users and groups, for example. So here are system users beginning with the UID root 0 down to the most recently created user ID of 501. And there's an NFS anonymous account of 65,534, which doesn't show up as well because the interface suppresses that account. You can interact with any of these accounts. If you don't want to see all these additional accounts, just navigate back to Preferences and say Hide System User Accounts. And there are some defaults in here, if you take a look, for UIDs, GIDs, as well as preferred private group is the same as UIDs. These are all defaults that are set when you create a new user. Let's modify the full name of Student 1 by navigating to the full name field, which is really the Gecko's description field, and calling it Student 1. If you wanted to change a shell, click on the drop box, and shells that are available are made available, including no login, which can be used for an FTP account. You can change the password. Account info, you can set it to expire. You can lock it. You can also change the settings from shadow. This is set to 45. Let's set it to 30. In fact, let's set it to 2. Days before warning 1. Days before change allowed 1. So we'll set this to 3 so it's a little more sensible. And here we see group membership. The primary group is always in Red Hat Linux the name of the user. However, you can assign the user to any number of supplemental groups, including sales, which you see is checked. Click on OK and it updates the properties of the user's account, and the underlying shadow file as well as groups file if necessary. To manage groups, just navigate to groups, and it's the same thing. To add or remove users from the sales group, just navigate to group users, find the users on the list, and remove the users accordingly. It's just point and click. To add a new user, this pops up a form. Just fill it in, and the user will be created with the next user ID. To create a new group, just click on Add Group, and it's that simple. So let's add a group for marketing. If you want, you can specify the GID manually. Otherwise, one will be provisioned for you based on the most recently used GID. To add members, double-click, go to Group Users, and find the members that are of interest. Now they're alphabetized, so we'll ascending, so we'll find Student 1 towards the bottom. And now these two users belong to the group. It's that simple to manage groups. You can add them, add users, refresh if you're not seeing updates affected immediately, and interact with your users at any time. You can also search for users, such as student. This will return only accounts with student, for example. And you can make changes. The interface is very self-explanatory, very easy to use. So we'll quit this interface and move on, since you now know how to make use of the user add, group add, user mod, group mod, as well as the GUI-based tool.